So hey everyone, welcome to my very first official video apart from the intro of my Coffee and Celebrities channel. So in this video I'm going to be doing it in two parts, and the first part, obviously this is going to be about Marilyn Monroe, as you have obviously seen, but this one is going to be about Norma Jean Baker. So this is before she became Marilyn Monroe, and to understand a little bit about Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean Baker, I think it's also important that we talk about her mother, Gladys. If you are interested in this type of video where I do a little bit of a psychoanalysis and a deep dive into the background of people that are in the public eye, some are going to be present, some are going to be past, then this channel could be for you. So don't forget along the way that if you are enjoying this, please give this a like, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss future uploads. And if you have enjoyed it and you want to support me, you can treat me to a cuppa, which is in the description box below. So that being said, let's dive right in. So Marilyn Monroe was born Norma Jean Mortensen. She later changed her name to Baker. And she was born on the 1st of June 1926 in California, LA to be precise. And she was born to Gladys, who was obviously her mother. To this date, her father has remained unknown, but there are obviously rumours circulating, and hopefully by the end of this video you can come to your own conclusion. I've been reading a lot of the things in regards to Marilyn Monroe's initial childhood, and like I said, I think to understand Marilyn, I think we also have to try and understand her mother. Her mother was depicted as crazy. She was institutionalized an awful lot, and there's a lot of reports, quite negative in a way, of how Norma Jean's mother Gladys was as a parent. However, I also want to point out that I think this was actually quite unfair. I've done quite a bit of research into this and I found it quite fascinating, but what I did come to the conclusion of with my therapist head on was that actually I truly do believe that, given the background of Gladys's early life, then going into marrying very young, very similarly to Norma Jean, I truly think that she suffered very serious mental health issues, and a lot of that was probably anxiety, depression, etc. And back in those days, if you suffered with anything like this, it wasn't called depression. You were deemed as crazy, and especially with women, and they were thrown into asylums. If they suffered with depression, if they suffered with anything, even postpartum depression, having a child, they were thrown into an asylum because they were deemed as crazy. And I think it's really sad that even nowadays, with the knowledge that we have, that when you research Gladys, without kind of going into a deep dive about her, one of the first things that come up is that she was crazy, she was schizophrenic, she had possibly multiple personality disorder, etc. And I truly feel that this does her a disservice, because when you do go, and I hope that by the time you've listened to this video, you will come to the same conclusion as me, that I think that she'd gone through a horrendous life and she was deeply troubled. She struggled with her mental health, and actually, rather than get the support that she needed, she was in effect, like I say, deemed crazy and thrown into an asylum. And I think along the way, through learnt behaviour, Norma Jean, aka Marilyn Monroe, adopted some of these behaviours. And again, because it was very early on, you didn't get the help and support that you get now. And so I think that with maybe the right help, Marilyn Monroe might still be around today. I don't know, but we'll get into that. So Gladys Pearl Monroe, as she was born, who later became Gladys Pearl Baker, was deemed to be schizophrenic. She had a very troubled life, and it went on to, for the fact that she also had a very strained relationship with her daughter Marilyn. However, there are other people that think that they also had quite a strong connection, to the point when Marilyn Monroe passed away, she left a significant inheritance to her mother, which tells you that there was definitely still some connection there, regardless of what people have led us to believe. Gladys Pearl Monroe was born in 1902 in Mexico, but she grew up in LA. Gladys' father was a railway car painter, but sadly, due to mental health issues and what was deemed to be alcoholism, he died in 1909. So she was 7 years old when her father passed away, which would have had a significant damaging effect on her, especially as her mother wasn't very strong in herself either. Now, back in those days, you've got to remember this is 1909, so there wasn't a lot of opportunities for women, especially women who were widowed or single. And so one of the things that a lot of women turned to was entertaining men for money, which is what Gladys's mother started to do. So this was very troubling, obviously, for a very young Gladys, because not only has she lost her father, but all of a sudden it's like for her mother, who was struggling to deal with the loss, was also throwing herself because she had money trouble. She had to look after her child, so she didn't know what else to do. So she started entertaining these random men that were coming in. So this would have been really a huge change for a very young Gladys at this point, and not really understanding what was going on. So this went on for most of Gladys's young life, to the point when she also remarried when she was 10 years old. So for 3 years, she's got all these kind of strange men coming in because her mother, and this is not a slight against her mother, because I think, like I say, that those days were very, very different, and there were not the opportunities for women back then that what there are now. And in some ways, it shows us how far we have come. I mean, there's still improvements to be made, but we have come so far in regards to the opportunities for women. And so at the age of 10, her mother remarries, and from what the reports that I can glean, Gladys didn't get on with him very well. She didn't like him very much. And this wasn't helped by the fact that her stepfather was obviously very troubled, and he went on to literally lose everything. He lost all of his money, he lost his job, I think they lost a lot. And he ended up running off, basically, just leaving them with nothing. So again, her mother is thrown into being on her own again, going back to the same type of thing. And Gladys is very young and in the midst of all of this. So, like I say, this would have been very troubling for her. So one of the things that Gladys did to escape from everything that was going on in the house with her mother was she would take a walk down to the local pier, and she would do this almost every day. And then around the age of 14, she met a man who was around the age of 25. There's slight mixes in the age. Some people say it was 30, but from what I can gather, we'll say between the age of 25 and 30. He took a shine to Gladys, who was 14. So can you imagine that for a second, like how we would feel if we had, say, a 14-year-old daughter who, times were very different then, and the children were sort of going out and about, and there wasn't really much to worry about, so to speak. But at the age of 14, meeting a 25 to 30-year-old who takes a shine to her and wants to marry her. And then not only that, her mother agrees for financial reasons. I mean, just that alone in itself, I found very shocking, because I didn't know that. And then that kind of explains a lot, really, when you think about the fact that, again, mirroring her mother's childhood, Norma Jean gets married at the age of 15, so she doesn't have to go back into care. So there's a lot of mirroring early childhood behaviour across the board with her mother. So this man's name was John Newton Baker, while Gladys had her name changed from Monroe to Baker. I'm going to put a picture up here to show you what she looked like and what he looked like. So apparently the mum worked under Mr. Baker. So I think there was possibly an element of pressure and fear of, if she said no, that she could potentially lose the job that she had. So her mother gave consent due to the money worries that she had. She didn't want to risk losing her job. So at the age of 14, 10 days prior to her 15th birthday, she gave consent and they got married. Like I say, just imagine that for a second, nearly 15 years of age, and you're marrying a guy who's 25, 30 years old. What was really sad in reading about this was how traumatic this relationship was for Gladys. He was very, by all accounts, very abusive towards her. She suffered massively. She went on to have 2 children with him, and she's still a baby herself. And I find this so deeply shocking. But again, I have to remember that back then times were very, very different. But we also then look at the fact that when we have those judgments about, when we look at a lot of the countries that in their culture they marry very young girls, when we look at this was happening back then for, you know, I know, and I don't even think it's just synonymous with the United States. I think it was even happening in the UK. So, you know, those times girls were married off very young to help the families financially. So in 1918, she had her first child, Robert, who was nicknamed Jackie. Then a year later, she went on to have her daughter, Bernice. Now, there are obviously stories regarding her children, and one of them being that her son suffered a terrible car accident. They were in a car as a family and there was an accident, and he suffered terrible injuries which resulted in him being disabled. I couldn't find much more on this, but it seems that she was with this guy for around 6 years, and then eventually she was able to get a divorce. The judge, which was very unusual back in those days because the children were deemed as the male property. So they were property of the husband. But I guess given the amount of abuse that Gladys had gone through, the judge actually gave her full custody of the children, which made her so happy because she was such a family. She was such a wonderful mum. She, even though she was very young, she absolutely doted and loved her children. However, this was very, very short-lived because unfortunately, due to the contact issues, she gave contact for her ex-husband to have a visit with the children, and he ended up kidnapping them and taking them, and so she lost them. And this absolutely devastated her. She couldn't cope with the loss of her children. And I think that this is indicative of the times back then, but we have to imagine how we would feel if this had happened to us, if we had children and this had happened. I know how I can imagine it. And I know that there are things that still happen to this day where people run off with the children and not give a thought to the other parent, or how the children are affected. But you've got to remember, this is back in like 1919. There was nothing available around them, and women were not given the same level of treatment men were deemed as what a man says, you know, goes, etc. So she falls apart because she can't cope with the loss of her children. She's grieving, and what do? They throw her in an asylum. So after kind of sorting herself out and coming out, she then gets a job. And this is when she meets a woman called Grace McKee, who befriended her. And I think they ended up with this little apartment and they lived together. And so she got this job and she seemed very happy for a while. She was vowing that she was going to save her money and she was going to look into back. And this was her main focus. However, sadly, after 4 months of her using up all of her money, attempting to try and get her children back, it didn't work. And so she had to give up due to financial reasons, and she had to go back and start working again. This is when she ended up meeting a Martin Edward Mortensen, and she married him. And this was around 1924. Now, rumours were circulating that the father was possibly the boss of where she worked. So Norma Jean was born on the 1st of June 1926, and the mother and daughter were in the charity ward at the local hospital, and she put Mortensen's name on the birth certificate. I'm guessing back in those days it would have been just unacceptable to not name a father, and I suppose for her it just felt better for her to have a name on the birth certificate. However, the secret of the real father, she took that to the grave. So this was Gladys's 3rd child, and there's rumours that circulated around that time that she absolutely doted on Marilyn. She sobbed that she was not going to lose another child, and so she was going to do everything that she possibly could to make sure that she had a relationship with this child. Other children, little Jackie was 6 years old and Bernice was 5 years old, and she still hadn't seen them. You can imagine for her at this time she was probably in a very desperate state. However, unfortunately, again, like back in those days, one of the things that really plagued her was the financial situation. How was she going to work and take and look after her child at the same time. Her mum spoke about the fact that her neighbours did a fostering scheme where you pay the foster parent so much money a month or a week so you can work, almost like a babysitting service. They look after your child during the week. It meant that she could still see her child, but have help, so she was able to work as well. So she signed this up with two people, Ida and Al Bollinger, I think their name is pronounced. So she brought them Norma, and it worked. She was able to go to work. She would visit her child at the weekend. She still had that relationship with her. She paid her bills on time. She paid her rent. Given the circumstances, she was a really good mum. If you do the research, there's lots of stories where she's, they start to talk about her going crazy around this time. A lot of conflicting stories, but what I started to see is there was possibly an element of jealousy where possibly what could have been happening was that Norma was possibly getting a bit confused and was starting to call Ida mum, which would have upset Gladys and in a sense made her jealous. So there was probably some conflict there. So I can imagine that would have really affected her if that was happening. So apparently around the age of 7, Gladys qualified for getting help towards getting a house, an apartment, and she did. She then took Norma in with her and they lived together. So for 2 years, they would be together all the time. They cooked together, they did everything together, they cleaned together. Mother and daughter had this really sort of cute little relationship. Unfortunately, what changed everything was, which I feel was just so devastating, is that unfortunately Gladys was told her son had died and her world fell apart. There's stories of, police sirens screeching and, there was wailing and just, you can only imagine the grief that she must have gone through. She didn't have a relationship. She was told that her son had died and she was absolutely broken. And instead of support, instead of sympathy, instead of understanding, they carted her off to the asylum. Her son had apparently just turned 15 when this had happened. And I think, she can be forgiven for, in that moment, not necessarily thinking, well, I've got another child here. Her grief was so huge that she couldn't comprehend anything else. So at 9 years old, Norma Jean lost her mum, as her mum was carted off. So her friend Gracie came and took Norma and said that she was going to look after her, but due to, and this is what was said, however, on looking into this, what she said was that given the fact that she had a husband and she had her own children, she could not look after Norma Jean. However, what I found out was that the tiny, and I'm just going to put a trigger warning here because this happened, but this can be quite devastating. At the tiny age of 10, she was this by Grace's husband. And so what I think was that rather than confront this and kick this guy out, again, times were very different, I back then as well, and I understand that probably for her there was a fear as well, but however, she basically kicked out Norma Jean at 10 years old. So Norma Jean, her world not only has already fallen apart because of what's happened to her mother, she has no father, no siblings that she's known of, and the woman that she called her auntie has abandons her. And yeah, I just think it's pretty devastating. Apparently Gracie went to a court system and said that she wanted to put her into foster care given the reasons of the fact that she just couldn't have the means to look after her. What they didn't tell Gladys was that this was done through the court. So when Gladys tried to get her daughter back, she was told she couldn't. again, Gladys's world fell apart and she was hauled back to the asylum again. So Norma Jean moved from foster home to foster home. It was around 10 times she was moved from pillar to post. So when she would start to get accustomed to one family, she was moved off again between 1935 and 1942. And so this was when Norma met James Doherty's family, and the arrangement was made that she would marry James, who was 21 years old, and Norma Jean was 15 years old. And this was done so she didn't have to go back into the foster care system. So James was actually a well-respected Los Angeles police officer. Apparently, which I didn't know, he even went on to help invent and create the SWAT team that we know of now. However, regardless of the accolades that he has, he is mostly well known for the fact that he was the first husband of Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean Baker. So he met Norma when she was 15 years old, and this is when she was placed in the care of a Grace Goddard. As apparently her foster family that she was with at the time wanted to relocate, Norma Jean couldn't go with them because it was taking them out of state and she was classed as a minor. So because they wanted to move, unfortunately, she couldn't go with them. The Goddards at that time lived across the way from the Doherty family. They had a son named James. At 20 years old, he had just graduated from, say this correct, Van Nuys High School, and he started working nearby at Airhead Lockhurst Corporation. So rather than sending Norma Jean back into the foster care system, they decided that one of the best things to do was to have her marry their son. So she was introduced to James and they had a very brief courtship. Their first date, they went on a dance. He said that she was a very mature young lady, and from all what I can see, they actually got on very well. So 1942, around 2 weeks after Norma Jean's 16th birthday, they got married. So James, at this point, he left the corporation that he was working at and he went on to join the Navy. He was stationed in Catalina for the first year of their marriage, and from all reports that I can read, they actually had quite a happy initial start of their marriage. They got on very well. There's nothing that I can see that showed that he was untoward towards her. It is rumoured that they loved each other actually very deeply, even given the fact that they hadn't known each other that long, but they did. However, around a year after their marriage, things started to go wrong due to the fact that James was shipped off to the Pacific around 1944, and his long stints away from home started to put a real strain on the marriage. And looking at that, you know, you can kind of understand that, given that, again, Norma was very young. What you find with people that go through this type of trauma are just looking for love. There's a neediness within them, that there's just something missing. They want to love and be loved and feel it. And so when you have her husband, who she loves, is constantly going away, for her, I would imagine there would have been this deep loneliness and feeling that something's missing. You know, she has no other family, and in a way she's probably put everything into this marriage to, in a sense, make him happy, and I'm sure he did her, but the loneliness that she probably felt, so she would start to then seek almost that gratification elsewhere. And for her, it wasn't with other men. She wanted something more. So in Doherty's words, he said that she started to become quite ambitious. While he was away, she decided to take on a job. She didn't want to be just at home, so she took on a job at a radio plane factory making parts for aircraft. And a lot of this was because she also wanted to be part of the war effort. While she was there, she met a photographer called David Conover. He was sent to factories to actually photograph female work. Well, anyway, Norma Jean caught his attention. And so she started doing modelling jobs for him. And she got, I guess, so into this, and she really enjoyed it, that she ended up signing with a modelling agency. It was around this time that she then, I guess that she got the bug. You know, she got the bug, she wanted to do more, and why not? You know, she's a young woman, she was very beautiful, and she felt that there was always more. And again, given her background and the things that she's gone through, you do find, or I find, that when I've certainly worked with clients, is that there's a hole inside, and it needs to be satiated. And some of that is adulation and love. So she wasn't getting it from her husband anymore because he was stationed away, at no fault of his. But she was starting to get all this attention from this photographer. She was possibly getting attention due to the photographs and she liked that. It filled something within her, but it wasn't enough, so she wanted more. And so that's when she signed then 20th Century Fox. And I guess she made such an impression on her that they signed her. I guess that she made such an impression with them that they signed her, even though she didn't have any real acting experience at all, and very minimal experience as a model. But they saw something within her and they signed her. However, it came with a stipulation, unfortunately, that to sign her, she couldn't be married, and she also had to distance herself from, I'm guessing, the stigma that was around her mother. You can imagine for James, he was absolutely devastated, and from his accounts, he tried to convince her not to do this, but she'd got the bug and it was too late, and so she agreed, and unfortunately they divorced. Now, around this time, her mother had actually come out of the asylum, and so while she was going through this divorce, they actually lived together. You have the fact that you've got, you know, Norma, who's now becoming this rising star. She's divorcing the man that she married at 15 years of age, and she's had this relationship with her mother that has been quite traumatic. And then also around this time, Gladys then met another man, John Stuart Ely, I believe his name is. She fell madly in love with him. I really truly think that deep down they were both searching for love. You know, you got to marry. Gladys was married at the age of 14. She'd suffered so much loss and trauma, thrown into asylums, you know, created like she's crazy. And I think deep down she just wanted to feel loved. She's got this difficult relationship with her daughter due to the fact that, you know, initially it was lovely, they were very close, but due to what happened to her, they become quite estranged, but they were still connected. But, you know, she's got the fact that her daughter is a rising star, going kind of off on her own, and so she's kind of left, you know, feeling alone again. So she marries this guy, she falls in love with him, and then unfortunately she later finds out he was already married with children, and it absolutely devastated her. And so again, unfortunately, off to the asylum she went again. Marilyn didn't want her mother being hounded by the paparazzi as she was, you know, up and coming and getting noticed. And so that's when she started saying that she was actually an orphan and she didn't have any parents. They died when she was a lot younger. Doherty sadly died in 2005 from leukemia, and he left behind a wife and 3 children. He always spoke very fondly of her, which I think is quite lovely and a testament perhaps to the love that they had for each other. Norma Jean, her star was rising, so this was when, in a way, I guess what I see is that Norma Jean Baker died and Marilyn Monroe was born. And that is what I'm going to be discussing in the next video. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I think that from what I can see, I don't believe in any shape or form that Marilyn's mother was crazy. I think that she was just sadly a victim of her time. She was going through so much trauma. She'd been through so much heartbreak, and there wasn't the support back then that there necessarily is now. And back then it was deemed completely acceptable that if a woman wasn't doing what she was supposed to be doing, that she was chucked into an asylum and being deemed as crazy. And rather than supporting and trying to get her well, she didn't have that. And so then that resulted in the breakdown of the relationship that she had with Marilyn. But I think because of the love that was there, even though it was very troubled and strained at times, that's what kept the connection there. And like I say, and it went on for the fact that when Marilyn passed away, she left a huge chunk of her inheritance to her mother. And her mother only ever spoke proudly of her daughter. I think, you know, from what I can gather, there was newspaper cuttings where she would follow her career, and it was just sad to me that nobody acknowledged until later on when a reporter then revealed it, which I will go into in the next video. But in the beginning, nobody acknowledged the fact that she was actually Marilyn Monroe's mother. They just thought that she was just crazy. And I just think it's just very sad. It's a very sad story to me, and it was quite sad for me to do the research into that. But I'm grateful because it was eye-opening, and it gave me a deeper insight into Marilyn, her early years, and also Gladys, her early years. And if the times had been different, I wonder if the outcome would have been very different. If perhaps Marilyn had had that love of her mother and that was allowed to flourish, then would Marilyn perhaps have sought the relationships that she did later on down the line, which then maybe led to what happened to her. I don't know, but maybe in the next video we'll talk about that. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I appreciate the fact that it's quite long. These videos are going to be, because it's very difficult to go into the ins and outs of things without, you know, I don't want to cut it short and do it a disservice. I didn't want to do Gladys a disservice. I didn't want to do Norma Jean a disservice. So I hope that you've enjoyed this video. Maybe you've learned something today that, you know, I certainly learned some things when I was doing the research into this. And I think it shows that not to automatically jump on the very first thing that we see is, you know, it's important to me that, you know, I do the research that I'm doing on this channel, because like I say, it's important, especially when we're talking about real people and their lives. And it's important to try and get the facts as near to the truth as possible. So like I say, if you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and you want to do so you do not miss future uploads, then please think about doing so. If you have enjoyed this and you want to treat me to a cuppa, then the link will be in the description box below, and I really do appreciate it. If you are somebody that wants a bit more therapy related things, I also have a channel called Tea and Therapy. The link is in the description box below. And I also have another channel called TNT, which talks more about the royals and at the moment mainly Harry and Meghan. So if you are somebody that's interested in that type of thing, then go across and follow me there. So yeah, you can also follow me on Instagram. I'm also over there, but like I say, all the links are in the description box below. But in the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and I will see you in next week's video. So take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.